first ring shattered the quiet of the stormy night, its shrill tones slicing through the steady patter of rain against the windows. I glanced at the old landline phone on the hallway table, my pulse quickening. Who even used a landline anymore? Mom had said it was a relic of a bygone age, something she kept for emergencies. But it was late, almost midnight, and no one ever called. The second ring came, louder this time, reverberating through the stillness of the house. "Pick it up, Timmy," I muttered to myself, the words barely audible over the hammering of rain. My fingers trembled as I reached for the receiver. "Hello?" At first, there was silence. Then, faintly, a voice crackled through the line. It was low, almost whispery, but unmistakably human. "Are you alone, Timmy?" My heart leapt to my throat. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that sent a chill racing down my spine. "You don't know me, but I know you. I know you're sitting by the window, wearing your favorite hoodie. I know your mom isn't home tonight." I bolted upright, my eyes darting around the room. The curtains were drawn, but I felt the suffocating weight of unseen eyes watching me. My hoodie felt suddenly constricting, like it was clinging too tightly to my chest. "How do you know that?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. The voice ignored my question. "You shouldn't have gone into the attic last week, Timmy. Some things are better left untouched." The attic? I hadn't told anyone about that. It was an old dusty space I'd explored out of boredom when the rain first started last weekend. I'd found nothing but cobwebs and forgotten furniture, or so I thought. "You're lying," I said, gripping the phone tighter. The voice chuckled again, the sound wrapping around me like a sinister embrace. "You think so? Check the mirror in the hallway. Go ahead." The line went dead. For a moment, I couldn't move. The house seemed to grow colder, the shadows in the corners darker. I set the receiver down with trembling hands and turned toward the hallway mirror. The reflection stared back at me, familiar yet alien. My face was pale, my dark eyes wide with fear. But then something changed. My breath caught in my throat as I saw it, the faintest flicker of movement behind me. It was subtle, barely a shift in the shadows, but it was there. A dark shape, indistinct but looming, just beyond the edge of the frame. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. A gust of wind rattled the window panes, and the storm surged on, louder now. I stepped back from the mirror, the unease settling in my chest like a weight. Somewhere in the house, the phone began to ring again. By the time I worked up the courage to answer the second call, the ringing had stopped. Silence settled over the house like a heavy blanket, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room. I pressed my ear against the receiver, half expecting to hear the voice again. "Hello?" Nothing but static. I set the phone down, my hands trembling. The air felt charged now, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I walked through the halls, the old wooden floorboards creaking under my bare feet. The attic. The word floated to the forefront of my mind, unbidden. I hadn't thought much about my little adventure up there, how the air had felt staler than it should have, how the light from my flashlight had seemed to bend around certain corners. It had felt wrong, but I hadn't found anything, or so I thought. As I climbed the creaking staircase toward the attic door, the unease grew heavier. The shadows at the top of the stairs seemed deeper than before, as though they were waiting for me. The attic door was ajar. I was certain I had closed it. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. The old brass felt unnaturally cold beneath my fingers. I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. The flashlight I had used last week was still lying on the dusty floor where I'd left it. I picked it up, the beam cutting through the gloom. Cobwebs hung like tattered curtains, and the air smelled of mildew and something faintly metallic. Then I saw it, a small door hidden behind a stack of rotting boxes. I hadn't noticed it before. It was odd, built low into the wall, its surface covered in peeling paint. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, yet the brass handle shone faintly in the flashlight's glow. Curiosity warred with fear as I approached the door. My fingers brushed against the handle, and I hesitated. A faint whisper echoed in my mind, so soft it could have been my imagination. "Don't open it." I yanked my hand back, my heart racing. But the pull was too strong, the mystery too enticing. I gripped the handle and turned it. The door opened with a low creak, revealing a narrow passageway that sloped downward into darkness. From deep within, a faint, rhythmic sound echoed, a low, mechanical hum, like an old motor sputtering to life. Behind me, the phone began to ring again. The passageway yawned open before me, a narrow tunnel cloaked in shadows. The air seeping from within was damp and stale, carrying a faint, mechanical hum that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. My flashlight flickered as I shone it into the darkness, the beam struggling to penetrate more than a few feet ahead. The phone's ringing echoed faintly from the house below, a distant reminder of the world I'd just left behind. The sound tugged at me, but my curiosity outweighed my fear. I stepped into the passage. The walls were rough, unpainted wood, the boards warped with age. My feet disturbed a layer of thick dust on the floor, each step leaving behind a trail. The hum grew louder as I moved deeper, accompanied by faint noises, whispers that seemed to skitter, just out of reach. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper. The tunnel absorbed the sound, amplifying the silence that followed. The space opened up abruptly into a small room. My flashlight revealed what seemed to be a forgotten workshop. Rusted tools hung from the walls, their edges dulled by time. A workbench stood against one side, cluttered with strange, intricate mechanisms. They resembled parts of an old clock, their gears frozen mid-motion, as though someone had abandoned them in the middle of their work. But it was the far wall that caught my attention. It was covered in faded wallpaper, floral patterns that had long since peeled away in places to reveal the bare wood beneath. On this wall were pinned dozens of old photographs, their edges yellowed and curling. I stepped closer, my breath catching in my throat. The photographs were of children, their faces solemn and expressionless. Some wore clothes that looked decades old, while others seemed more recent. But it wasn't just their dated appearance that sent a chill racing down my spine. It was their eyes. Every child in every photo had their eyes scratched out. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking in my grip. The whispers grew louder now, their words indistinct but urgent. They seemed to come from the walls themselves, vibrating through the wood. "You found it," a voice said behind me. I whirled around, the flashlight beam darting wildly across the room. No one was there. "You weren't supposed to open the door," the voice continued, low and rasping, as though spoken through gritted teeth. "Who's there?" I demanded, backing away from the wall. The only answer was a faint laugh, dry and brittle, echoing through the space like crumpled paper. Then the hum in the room deepened, the sound reverberating through my chest. I turned to flee, my footsteps pounding against the floorboards. The passageway seemed longer now, stretching endlessly ahead of me. The whispers followed, growing louder, merging into a cacophony of unintelligible voices. As I burst out of the attic, the house greeted me with an oppressive silence. The phone was no longer ringing, but its absence felt more unsettling than the sound itself. I slammed the attic door shut and leaned against it, my heart pounding in my chest. But even as I stood there gasping for air, I could feel the whispers, soft now, faint but insistent, still clawing at the edges of my mind. The house felt different. The air was heavier, as though the very walls were watching me. The silence was no longer comforting. It was suffocating, pressing in from all sides. I made my way to the living room, hoping the familiar surroundings would calm me. But as I sank into the worn armchair by the window, the shadows in the corners seemed to shift, writhing like living things. The phone rang again. I stared at it, my body frozen. I didn't want to answer. I knew the voice would be there, waiting for me, whispering things I wasn't ready to hear. But the ringing didn't stop. Each shrill tone cut deeper, fraying my nerves. Finally, with a trembling hand, I picked up the receiver. "Why did you open the door, Timmy?" the voice rasped. My throat tightened. "What is this? Who are you?" "You've let it out," the voice continued, ignoring my questions. "It's awake now, and it's hungry." A faint creak echoed through the house, the sound of a floorboard bending under unseen weight. My head whipped toward the hallway. "What's awake?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The voice laughed, soft and chilling. "You saw the photos, didn't you? They're the ones who came before you. They opened the door, too. And now..." The line crackled, and for a moment, I thought it had gone dead. But then, the voice spoke again, softer now, almost a whisper. "Now it's coming for you." A sudden knock came from the window behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. The curtains were drawn, but I could see a faint, dark outline on the other side of the glass. It wasn't human. Its shoulders were hunched, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. The knock came again, louder this time. I backed away, my breath shallow and ragged. The figure outside the window didn't move, but its presence pressed against the glass, as though it were testing the barrier. The whispers returned, rising in volume, their words indistinct but filled with malice. They seemed to echo from everywhere, the walls, the floors, the very air around me. I stumbled toward the hallway, my legs trembling beneath me. The shadows stretched and twisted, following me like living things. And then I heard it, a soft, rasping voice, almost drowned out by the whispers. "Run, Timmy." I didn't need to be told twice. I ran, the whispers chasing me through the house. Every corner I turned seemed darker, every shadow heavier, as if the house itself was twisting, reshaping into something alien. The air thickened, each breath coming harder than the last. Behind me, the sound of the window creaking open sent a fresh surge of terror through my veins. I reached the kitchen and flicked on the overhead light. The bulb sputtered weakly before plunging me back into dimness, its flicker casting long, warped shadows across the room. My eyes darted to the back door, my only hope of escape. But as I grabbed the knob, it refused to turn. "Please," I whispered, yanking harder, but it was no use. The door was as still as stone. A low creak came from the hallway, the unmistakable sound of something dragging across the wooden floor. I froze, my heart pounding so loudly it seemed to fill the room. The whispers swelled, rising into a chorus of unintelligible words, their tone taunting, hungry. The phone rang again. I turned slowly, the old rotary phone sitting impossibly on the counter. I knew I hadn't brought it here, but there it was, its shrill tone splitting the silence. My hand trembled as I reached for the receiver. "Hello?" My voice cracked, barely audible. "You can't run from it, Timmy," the voice rasped, colder now, almost gleeful. "What is it? Why is it here?" "It's always been here," the voice replied. "But you opened the door. You invited it in." I sank to the floor, the phone cord stretching taut as I gripped the receiver like a lifeline. "What does it want?" The line crackled, and then, softer, the voice said, "To make you part of the house, like the others." The whispers surged again, louder now, almost deafening. I pressed my hands to my ears, dropping the receiver, but the sound was inside me, vibrating through my skull. The shadows in the room began to move. They crept along the walls, pooling on the floor, inching closer with each passing second. Shapes emerged from within them, elongated, twisting figures with hollow eyes that glowed faintly. I scrambled backward, my hands slipping on the cold tile. The figure stopped just beyond the circle of dim light, watching, waiting. "Timmy?" The voice on the phone called again, softer now, almost kind. "You can end this, but you must make it leave." I turned back to the phone, clutching it like a lifeline. "How?" "Send it back. It's bound to the shadows, to the space between the walls. You opened the door. Now you must close it." "The attic." The thought struck like lightning. The whispers grew sharper, angrier, as if they knew what I was planning. The shadows surged forward, reaching for me with spindly fingers that stretched unnaturally long. I bolted, clutching the phone in one hand as I raced back toward the stairs. The air grew colder with each step, the whispers tearing at my mind. My legs burned, but I didn't stop until I reached the attic door. The shadows writhed around me, clawing at the edges of my vision. My hand trembled as I grabbed the handle and threw the door open. The attic was alive with noise now, the hum from the passageway roaring like a storm, the whispers blending into a deafening cacophony. The small hidden door at the far end of the attic stood wide open, darkness spilling from it like a living thing. "You must force it back," the voice on the phone urged, faint but clear. Clutching the receiver like a talisman, I approached the door. The darkness pulsed, reaching out for me with cold, intangible tendrils. "You don't belong here," I whispered, my voice shaking. The whispers faltered, just for a moment. "This is my home," I said louder, my voice rising. "You don't belong here." The darkness recoiled, the shadows pulling back as though burned. The hum grew louder, rising to an ear-splitting pitch. "Leave!" I screamed. The force of the word echoed through the attic, and the shadows writhed in agony. The darkness surged back into the passage, collapsing inward like water down a drain. Then silence. The attic was still, the air heavy and cold. My knees buckled, and I sank to the floor, clutching the phone. The hidden door had closed, the faint outline of its edges barely visible beneath the peeling wallpaper. "Is it gone?" I whispered into the receiver. The line crackled. Then, faintly, the voice replied, "For now." The phone went dead. I sat there in the attic for what felt like hours, the shadows on the walls no longer moving. The whispers were gone, but their echo lingered in my mind, a faint reminder of what had happened. As I descended the stairs, the house seemed lighter, as if it, too, had exhaled a long-held breath. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, not entirely. The phone sat silently on the kitchen counter, its cord coiled neatly. And though I didn't hear the whispers anymore, I knew they were still there, waiting,